how can they be up by 6 but have such a lousy favorability rating?
Yeah, you see Democrats up by 6 and only 28% favorability rating. How is that possible? It is because of the double haters, the most important 1/4 of the electorate you have ever seen. Take a look here. Who double haters prefer among the 26% who dislike not just the Democrats, but the Republicans as well? Look at this. Democrats up by a 55% to 24% margin. That's a 31-point lead among that key quarter of the electorate who can't stand either party. They are, in fact, the Democrats, the lesser of two evils.
This is the, pox on both their houses caucus,
Yes.
basically. So what has this group told us in the past?
What has this group told us in the past? This is the biggest movement that we've seen in the electorate versus the 2022 midterms when, of course, Republicans took back the House of Representatives. Take a look here. Okay, we talked about that 31-point lead that Democrats have right now. But take a look among the double haters back in 2022. Republicans won that group by 17 points, and with that, were able to take back the House of Representatives. Who wins double haters is the party that goes on to win the election. Of course, this all had a genesis back in 2016 when, of course, Donald Trump was able to beat Hillary Clinton on the backs of double haters. Republicans repeated that feat in the 2022 midterms, and now Democrats look to be in the driver's seat among the voters who dislike both parties, those double haters.
What are Democrats feeling right now?
Okay, what are Democrats feeling right now? Yesterday we did a segment about how even Democrats don't like their own leaders, and a lot of Democrats don't even like their own party.
By the way, the Republican Party put that segment out like in 2 seconds.
2 seconds. What are we talking about here? But this is the key thing. What is driving Democrats' votes? How voters who are Democrats feel. Disapprove of Trump, 99% of them. Look at how close this plan to vote Dem in 2026 is, 96%. This, Donald John Trump, is the key motivating factor at this point for Democrats and who they're going to vote for, despite the fact that only 63% of Democrats view their own party favorably. That is not what is driving them. What is driving them is Donald John Trump. They would go over hot coals. They would literally crawl over hot coals to vote against Donald John Trump, even if there are a lot of them who don't like their own party.
Yeah, they're mad at themselves. It doesn't mean that they're not going to go out there and vote for the Democrats.
They dislike themselves. They hate Donald Trump.
All right, so what might this mean for Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader right now?
Okay, what might this mean for Hakeem Jeffries? How about the chance that Jeffries is the next House Speaker? Look at this. 3 months ago, according to the Kalshi prediction market, it was a 66% chance. Now, today, we're talking about a 79% chance. You look at those double haters, and you know what? You climb the mountain any way you can. And at this point, it looks like Hakeem Jeffries is going to climb that mountain and become the House Speaker, the next House Speaker, if the polling data holds, on the backs of double haters. But you know what? Whatever way you can get there, you get there. And I think Democrats will take it, even if they don't love it.
Bad news for Republicans hasn't really been good news for Democrats.
No, not at all, at least when it comes to you isolate Democrats. I mean, these numbers are just atrociously awful. A double A for the Democrats here. I mean, just take a look here. Congressional Dems have the right priorities. Look at this. Overall, 74%, nearly 3 in 4 say no. Just 25% overall say yes. You might say, okay, well, at least Dems like Democrats. Not the case. Look at this. The majority of Democrats are independents who lean Democrats. Look at this. 55% say no, congressional Democrats do not have the right priorities. And then you just see a minority, 45% of Democrats say that congressional Democrats have the right priorities. This, to me, just jumps out at the screen because it screams primary challenges all over the map. And it says that even if Democrats don't like Donald Trump, they don't like their own party either when it comes to Congress. And overall, I mean, my goodness gracious.
So this is sort of like Democrat on Democrat crime here. What's overall approval among Democrats of their leaders?
Yeah, okay. So, you speak about Democrat on Democrat crime. And I want to know how unusual what we're seeing right now about how Democrats feel about Democrats in Congress is. Take a look at this. This is a trend line going back through the years, midterm elections in which there's a GOP president. Look at this. In 2006, Dems' net approval of congressional Democratic leaders was plus 28. You go back to the last midterm, look at that, plus 19. Very much on the positive side. The bottom has fallen out. The bottom has fallen out. Minus 4 points. That is Democrats' own net approval of their own congressional leaders. Even Democrats don't like their own leaders when it comes to Congress. And overall, of course, the numbers are just absolutely awful. So Democrat on Democrat crime, absolutely. This to me screams, again, primary challenges across the map. And it screams to me, hey, when it comes to those next leadership elections, maybe something might be cooking.
It also just means we have to maybe look at these midterms differently, because this is a different prism. We haven't seen this type of thing before. We don't know what impact that might have.
That's exactly right. And there are a lot of folks who've been looking at the generic congressional ballot and wondering why Democrats don't have a larger lead. And this is a big reason why, I would think.
Okay, so there's Hakeem Jeffries in the House. Chuck Schumer is the Senate Minority Leader. What might this mean for Chuck Schumer? What are some of the predictions about whether he can stay as the Democratic leader?
Chuck Schumer has been the Senate leader for the Democrats for a long period of time, before I even came to CNN, and I'm not quite sure that he will stay it. Take a look at where the people who are putting their money where their mouth is. Chance Schumer wins the next Dem Senate leader election. Back on December 1, look at this. It was 2 and 3 according to the Cash prediction market. Then drops to 56% in February. And then look at where we are right now. Just 50%. A coin toss. If I had a coin, I would toss it up in the air. A coin toss when it comes to Schumer actually winning the next Dem Senate leader election. And we've seen a number of Senate candidates, Democrats, across the map saying, we don't want any part of Chuck Schumer to be the next leader. And there's a big reason why that is, and it's because at this point, look at this -4, even Democrats don't approve of their own congressional leaders.
When I say a lot of Republicans have announced their retirement or they're not running again for the House, I mean, how many would you say? How would you put that in historical perspective?
You know, I would say that House Republicans are running for the exits faster than kids do on the final day of school. I mean, just take a look here. Oh, hello, most House retirements since 1930. So far this cycle, already 36. That is the grand record over the last nearly 100 years. My goodness gracious. That actually beats the former record in total, which was 34 back in the 2018 cycle. And that wasn't that long ago. And I do recall that was a very, very good year for House Democrats. The bottom line is this: you don't run for the exits unless you know trouble is brewing. And House Republicans so far believe trouble is absolutely brewing.
Okay, how do you know that? What does history tell us about these types of exits?
Okay, so, you know, I say it's brewing, and sometimes I just like to pontificate, but sometimes I actually have facts behind me. Let's take a look here. Okay, party with the fewer House retirements since 1982 in midterm cycles. They went on to win the U.S. House 80% of the time. Far fewer Democrats are retiring this cycle than Republicans. When one side runs for the exits, right? I'm doing my best right here, my best Usain Bolt right here. When one side runs for the exits, they lose the House of Representatives. When one side stays put, it's because they think something good is going to happen. And House Democrats clearly think something is good going to happen. And House Republicans clearly think something very bad is going to happen.
Again, we said this is basically a record since 1930, more than we've seen in 100 years. And that's just so far. I mean,
that's just so far. This is, I think, what's so clear is this number is likely to climb ever higher.
Okay, so what are they looking at? Sam Graves last Thursday, and it was a surprise. It was a bit of a reversal. What might he have been looking at that caused him to retire?
You know, some elected officials aren't so smart, but many of them are. And they're looking at the same numbers we're looking at. And what they're looking at is the President of the United States and his approval rating. So why don't we just take a look here? Why are GOP retiring? Okay, when the president's approval is less than 50%. I went back all the way through the record books, all the way back since 1938 in midterm elections. When the House, the Press Party in the House, on average, loses 34 seats when the president's approval rating is less than 50%. Donald Trump isn't anywhere close to 50%. He's at 40%. The average, the House for the president's party, they lose 34 seats. The least was just 9. That was actually Joe Biden back in 2022. But guess what? House Democrats only need to pick up of 1, 2, 3 in order to gain a majority. So the least, even the worst case scenario for Democrats is not anywhere close to what Republicans need to hold on to the House of Representatives. And one little last historical anecdote as I go over to the blackboard over here. The only 2 times that the president's party did not lose at least 3 seats was 1998 and 2002. You know what the president's approval rating was in those years? It was 60% plus. And Donald Trump at this point is just at a 40% approval rating, nowhere near what House Republicans need. And that is why I said they're running to the exits. John laughing over there.
No, I mean, you have great form. Harry Enten, thank you very much. This number very different than the president's current approval rating.
60 is very different
from 40. Thank you very much, sir. Sarah?
Was that good for him? Because I'm thinking of running a long race.
Sarah, we're going to run that marathon very much.
Are we? Okay, got it. Oh, you're good.
Look, our latest CNN SSRS poll took a gauge of Americans about how they feel about the war in Iran right now. And the only adjective that I can find to describe their feelings towards the war in Iran and President Trump's handling of it is awful. Awful, awful, awful. I mean, just look here. Look, the war was not popular to begin with, and it has somehow become even less popular. Net approval rating of the U.S. military action in Iran at the start of the war, again, minus 18 points. That's not good at all. But as we've gotten a month in, that number has managed to fall. Look at this. We're talking about minus 32 points. Minus 32 points. You're 32 points more likely, if you're in the American public, to disapprove than approve of the war in Iran right now. And amongst independents, I always like these little notes for myself. Look at that. In the center of the electorate, the net approval rating among independents on the war in Iran, minus 48 points. Only about 1 in 4 independents approve of the war in Iran right now. And of course, this has had political ramifications for President Trump. One of the reasons why they don't approve of the war in Iran right now is they just don't trust Trump when it comes to his role as commander-in-chief. Again, look at this. Trump's net approval rating in his role as commander-in-chief. Before the war began, Americans were not so hot to trot on the president. His net approval rating in his role as commander-in-chief, 18 points underwater. But look at this. That number, fallen. Look at this. Now, negative 33 points. Only 1 in 3 Americans approve of the job that President Trump is doing in his role as commander-in-chief. And among independents, again, such a key nugget that I keep harping on, it's even worse. Just 23% of independents, less than 1 in 4, approve of the job that President Trump is doing in his role as commander-in-chief. Now, when it comes to the war, more generally speaking, I like to make historical comparisons to put how bad these numbers are into context. And we can look back at the Iraq War, another war in the Middle East, at the beginning of this century, going back 23 years ago. Is the war worth the cost? About this point in the war. Look, back in 2003, when it came to the Iraq War, about 3 in 5 Americans, 59%, said yes, the war in Iraq back then was in fact worth the cost. Now, this number would fall, but at the beginning of the war, the Iraq War was actually popular and Americans thought that it was worth the cost. Look at this now. Only about half as many, in fact, slightly less than half as many Americans say that the Iran War is worth the cost. And that's not so much of a surprise as gas prices climb ever higher. Overall, this poll, just an abject disaster for the President of the United States. His approval rating, only about 1 in 3, maybe slightly more than that overall. When it comes to Iran, we're talking about a war that is becoming less popular by the day. And Americans, simply put, do not believe that it is worth the cost, which is very much a historical anomaly when it comes to wars in their early days. This is no April Fool's joke. This is a disaster. All these numbers are a disaster for President Trump. I mean, let's just talk about inflation, which is the name of the game. Okay, highest disapprovals on inflation about this time in a presidency. Whenever you have Joe Biden and Jimmy Carter on the board and you're matching them or slightly exceeding them when it comes to inflation, you know it's bad. Look at this. 72% in our latest CNN poll say they disapprove of the president on inflation. Joe Biden, average of polls at this point in his presidency, 68%. And Jimmy Carter, whose presidency, just like Joe Biden's, was absolutely wrecked by inflation, was at 66% about at this point in his presidency back in 1978. Donald Trump, even worse than they are. So you see it here, and the one word is, or phrase I might say is, oh my goodness gracious, what a disaster.
And just what's so interesting here is inflation was way higher.
Yes.
So they just, right now, voters don't like what the president is doing on it, even if it isn't as high as it was at these other times. What about gas prices?
What about gas prices, which of course is part of this inflation picture, only making this number climb ever higher? How about disapprove on gas prices? Okay, disapproval ratings on gas prices. Biden's worst number, his worst number in any poll I could find, was 72% disapprove of Joe Biden on gas prices. Donald Trump right now in our CNN poll, 76%. 76%. 3 in 4 Americans disapprove of the way that Donald Trump is handling gas prices. And again, The gas prices were higher during Biden, but the increase has been so dramatic. Oh, under the last month, under Donald Trump, we're talking about an increase of about $1. It's the highest increase that we've seen since at least 1991 in terms of raw dollars. No wonder this number is so high. He is beating or doing even worse than Joe Biden was on gas prices, which, of course, was such a major issue.
So talk about his disapproval on the economy. Put it in historical perspective.
Okay, so you see the gas prices here. Disaster. You see the inflation here. Disaster. How about the economy? You know, you mentioned it was the worst in terms of the approval rating for Donald Trump in any poll we've conducted. How about highest disapprovals on the economy about this point in term 2? Look at this. These are the worst. In our poll, 69% disapproved of Donald Trump on the economy. For George W. Bush, it was 57% in terms of the average. Barack Obama, 56%. Donald Trump is crushing him on a metric you don't want to be crushing anybody on, which is disapproval ratings on the economy. He's double digits worse. I was looking at some other polling data, also above the 57 and 56%. The worst of all time at this point in term number 2. It's the economy dragging Trump down, being, of course, accelerated by inflation being so bad. And, of course, the gas prices just adding up. It's like a pancake tower, and you're just reaching the top. And this is not a tower you want to climb.
One of the things you deal with when you deal with economic sentiment is how people feel things are going to be. So what are the prediction markets saying about where they see inflation going?
Yeah, where does the Kalshi prediction market say that we're going on inflation? Chance CPI year over year is above 4%.
Oh, wow.
In any month in 2026, 64%. That would be for the first time since 2023. So the inflation tower that we're going up, it seems like there are more steps on a stairway, certainly not to heaven, more like hell if you're the president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the White House certainly doesn't want the predictions to be right about this. That's
No.
clear. What are the prediction markets saying about whether it can be done?
Yeah, I've never whispered once in my life, John Berman. But look, the voices are getting louder and louder and louder. They may be, in fact, a Festivus miracle for Democrats, because just take a look at the Kalshi prediction market. This is the Dems' chances to win 2026 Senate races. And these are all GOP held seats. Look at this. In North Carolina, what are we looking at? Roy Cooper, the Democratic nominee there, an 84% chance. In Maine, could they knock off Susan Collins? That, of course, was a state won by Kamala Harris, a 71% chance there. Alaska, which hasn't, in fact, elected a Democrat to the Senate since 2008, a 56% chance there. And then Sherrod Brown, the very likely Democratic nominee, a 54% chance. In Ohio, of course, Sherrod Brown was knocked off back in 2024. But I will note, he was reelected during a Trump midterm back in 2018.
Okay, so if this were to hold, if the prediction markets were to be right and go 4 for 4 here, what would that mean for the U.S. Senate?
If Democrats pulled off the Festivus miracle and went 4 for 4, which the Kalshi prediction market says, hey, is a real possibility, look at this. They would, in fact, get to 51 Senate seats. You win up in Maine, okay? You win in Ohio. You win in North Carolina. And you win the big state of Alaska, which we got all the way back, in 1867. It's so large. That would, in fact, get you to 51 Senate seats. So, you know, it was something that was whispering about, but like me, getting louder and louder and louder.
Okay, and one of the reasons is maybe how the president is doing in some of these states.
Yeah, okay. So what are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at Alaska, North Carolina, Ohio. Let's take the aggregate totals in all of them. Look, back in the 2024 election, across those three, Trump won by 7 points. But look at his net approval rating now. His net approval rating way down. He's no longer popular in these states. He's at 10 points underwater. So all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, hey, you know what? These are Trump won states, but he's no longer popular. He has become quite unpopular. And the other little nugget I'll note is, you know, we said 4 for 4, but there is a fifth possibility because you got a Texas backup, right? Choice for Texas Senate, James Talarico versus John Cornyn. Cornyn's only up by a point. Kent Paxton only up by 2. So maybe you lose in a state like Alaska, but hey, you can sub into Texas and still get to 51 for Dems. So it's not so much of a long shot, at least anymore.
This was happening even before the war in Iran, but it seems to have sped up a little bit. How low are we talking?
We are talking as low as Death Valley. And this, I think, is so key here, which is, you know, Johnny B was pointing out, you know, it is sped up now, but this has been a steady fall into the abyss. There is no bottom. Death Valley, Death Sea. That is how low we are going. And look at this. I think this really just kind of shows that it is not one event that is dragging Donald Trump down. It's a slew of events that have come together and have continuously dropped his net approval rating. You know, you go back to last year when he was sworn in for a second term, he was at plus 6 points. Then minus 3 points a year ago, minus 7 points 9 months ago, minus 10 points in October 2025, January 2026, minus 13 points. And now all the way down to minus 18 points, a term too low. And what is so key to point out here is, let's just say that somehow we got out of the Iran war tomorrow. Yeah, it might climb a little bit, but we have seen this steady, slow, or steady and dropping number that just seems no sign of rising.
What's the comparison with his first term in office?
Yeah, I think what's so important to point out here is right now we've seen that steady drop downward. In term one, it was anything but that. Take a look here, the 3-month change in Trump's net approval rating at this point in the term. In term one, he was actually rising at this point. He was actually going up. His 3-month change was up by 5 points. Now we're talking about a 3-month change in which he has fallen to a new term too low, in which he's at minus 18 points. In term one at this point, he was actually higher. Remember, Trump was breaking all those records during term one, right? But at this point, term one, he was at minus 12 points in his net approval rating. He is now 6 points lower than he was at term two, at where he is right now in term two at this point, and he is just continuously falling, while term one, he had managed to turn it around. It was actually rising, and there is no sign of any bottom at this point in term number two.
Yeah, a big, big difference there in Republicans who are running for office in a few months watching this with a lot of trepidation. Let's talk about independents, which has been this group which really has just been eye-popping the last few months.
Eye-popping indeed. This number, if there's one big number from this, is that Donald Trump now has the worst net approval rating among independents of any president ever at this point in term two. He is worse than Richard Nixon, who would be going adios amigos in a few months back in 1974 in term two. Look at this, minus 45 points, worse than George W. Bush at this point in term two. The Iraq War was weighing him down at minus 37, and worse than Richard Nixon when, of course, there were all those impeachment hearings back in 1974 at minus 36 points. He's nearly 10 points worse among independents on his net approval rating at this point in term two, Donald Trump is, than Richard Nixon. My goodness gracious.
Height of Watergate, we're comparing it to here.
Yeah.
All right, we'll talk about possible collateral damage. I mean, the president can't run again, despite musings there, but what impact might this be having on, say, others close to him?
Others close to him. The Vice President of the United States, chance that J.D. Vance is a 2028 Republican nominee. 6 months ago, he was at a 53% chance. Down he goes. He goes down a 37% chance, according to the Kalshi prediction market. This is tied for his all-time low, J.D. Vance. But, you know, you just go back here, a slow or steady drop, my goodness gracious, with no sign of a bottom. Death Valley.
How popular was Pam Bondi, before yesterday, before she got fired?
Yeah, the American people are saying, thank God Pam Bondi is gone. She wore on them like an in-law who stayed too late past Christmas vacation. I mean, just take a look here. Net popularity of Pam Bondi. In January 2025, you know what? She was actually on the positive side of the ledger. Look at this, at plus 1 point. But look at this. Down she goes. The more people got to know Pam Bondi, the less they liked her. Her net popularity rating by the end, negative 19 points, a 20-point shift in the wrong direction. Of course, one of the key reasons being why was the Epstein case, which, of course, she was helping in charge of that particular in the Trump administration. And the American people, simply put, did not like Pam Bondi.
How does this compare to other people who've had the job?
Yeah, okay. So, President Trump sees this. He sees, oh, my God, she's wearing on my administration. And more than that, he might recall that there was actually a fairly popular attorney general at this point in administration. Look at this. Net popularities of attorneys general about this time in a presidency. Look, Joe Biden's Merrick Garland was actually on the plus side of ledger at plus 6 points. Look at this. Pam Bondi, far more unpopular here at minus 19 points at this point. So we're talking about Merrick Garland being more than 25 points more popular in the net popularity rating. And that's the reason why I had to put this former in parentheses right here, because Pam Bondi is bye-bye Bondi.
She's still serving for a little while longer. She's a fired, yet she has, the honor of getting to keep the job for a few more days until she loses her access to the building. You talked about Epstein. How does that issue rank among others.
Yeah, how does it rank? You know, the idea is, okay, we'll get rid of Pam Bondi, and maybe that would somehow make you more popular, Donald Trump, in the Epstein case. Look, the Epstein case is going to continue to be a big problem for Donald Trump, because just take a look here. Take a look at Trump's net approval rating, immigration, foreign policy, the economy, trade, tariffs, the Epstein case. Look at this. That is by far the worst issue for Donald Trump of the major issues, at negative 40 points. Negative 40 points. Worse than immigration, worse than foreign policy, worse than the economy, worse than trade and tariffs. So the bottom line is this. The Epstein case is not going away if you're Donald Trump, even if Pam Bondi is going away. The Epstein case is going to continue to weigh on the president of the United States.
But you don't want to be the face of that issue in the administration. Okay, what are the markets saying about who might be next as Attorney General?
Okay, so who might be next for Attorney General? Well, let's take a look at the Couch prediction market. Take a look here. Chance to be Trump's next Attorney General. Lee Zeldin is the favorite at this point. Of course, Lee Zeldin from the great state of New York, the great island of Long, 60% chance. Todd Blanchard, a 26% chance. So at this point, Zeldin is in the driver's seat, but I'm not quite sure it's a job you really want.
President Trump made an historic trip to the Supreme Court, the first ever president, we believe, to sit and listen to arguments before the court. This was over birthright citizenship and his executive order to severely limit birthright citizenship. So how did the arguments go? How did the president's trip go? With us now, CNN chief data analyst Harry Enten. So if his goal was to go there and maybe sway the court, to his side, what are the prediction markets saying?
The prediction markets viewed yesterday as an absolute train wreck for the President of the United States, and that matches what a lot of analysts believe after listening to those arguments yesterday. Take a look. Chance that Trump's birthright order takes effect before August. On Tuesday, it wasn't so hot to trot. It was 20%. But somehow it went through the basement. Look at this. Now just a 7% chance, according to the Couch prediction market, that in fact that birthright citizenship order takes effect before August. So the people who are putting their money where their mouths are very much agree with the analysts who think that what happened yesterday in the Supreme Court was no bueno for the President of the United States.
All right. How have Americans' attitudes, how have they changed over time on this specific issue?
Yeah, you see this 7% here, very low, that the chance that Trump's birthright citizenship order will in fact take effect before August. And the American people very happy about that, because this has been one of the biggest switches that we've really seen in politics when it comes to something as important as birthright citizenship. Take a look here. Birthright citizenship, favor opposed. Back in August of 2010, in fact, what you saw was the plurality, 50% opposed it, favor 47%. But that favor number, way up over the last decade and a half. Now we're talking about a very nice 69%, in fact, of Americans favor birthright citizenship. That opposed number has absolutely fallen to just 31%. This is one of the most popular issues that we see right now in the American public. The American public very much in favor of birthright citizenship for children born to immigrants here illegally.
What about shifting views on immigration?
Yeah, okay, so you see this 69%, the favor. This is part of a larger story in terms of immigration and Americans liking it. Say immigration is good for the U.S. Look at this change from 2024 to 2025. 79% overall of Americans say that, in fact, immigration is good for the U.S., a big jump up from when Joe Biden was president back in 2024. Even among Republicans, look at that, 39%, now 64%. 64% of Republicans say that immigration is good for the U.S. And more than that, this 79%, record high, a record high percentage of Americans now say that immigration is good for the United States of America.
For Republicans, it went from a minority issue to a majority?
That's exactly right. This is a huge jump, 39% to 64%.
That's fascinating. All right, how about the president's approval on the issue of immigration?
Okay, so you see immigration becoming more popular. Trump's stances on immigration going the exact opposite way, becoming less popular. Look at this. Take a look. Trump's net approval rating on immigration, January of 2025, it was +7, way down there. Look at that, a 20-point shift, negative 13 points. Independents from +3, they liked Trump at the beginning of his term. 2 thumbs up. Now look at this, down through the floor, negative 24 points. So the bottom line is immigration becoming more popular, Trump's stances the exact opposite way, becoming much less popular.
27-point shift among independents.
Huge.
Outfront's own producer, Emily Bushy, correctly predicted the Final Four of the men's NCAA tournament. Yes, she somehow anticipated UConn's stunning upset over Duke in the Elite Eight. Now, Congressman Ro Khanna stopped by the show last night. He heard about Emily's picks, gave her props. He tweeted, Aaron Burnett Booker picked the correct Final Four. Never met someone who had done that before. I mean, picking UConn instead of Duke. Harry Enten is out front to tell us something we don't know. Harry, okay, this is rare, right? What Emily did is rare, but it is more than rare, right?
It's more than rare. I could tell you, I get paid to be a data journalist, and I've never done it. I mean, I did want UConn to win, but I would never have picked it. And I would just say, just take a look at, that was a great victory, by the way. Holy smokes. Duke going down is an amazing thing for America. But either way, pick men's Final Four correctly. Look at this in terms of the percentage of brackets. Just 0.34% of all brackets actually picked a perfect Final Four. I went through the statistics and found that there is a less of a chance that you pick the Final Four than actually getting a straight in poker. And of course, a straight in poker is very, very difficult, Aaron.
Okay, it's amazing. So it is actually, by the way, you look at that 0.34%. It was harder to get the Final Four bracket this year than it was last year, right? Again, let's put rare in context.
Yeah, let's put it into some context here. Just take a look here. You mentioned the 0.34%. How about back in 2025? Look at this. It was 8%, more than 20 times harder this year than last year. You did it last year, I'd be like, you know what? There were a lot of people who got it right. It was basically a chalk bracket, in terms of just picking the top seeds. But this year, it was so much more difficult. Even as of late on Sunday, when UConn was down, what was it, by like 19 points, the idea, no one had it. No one had it. But Emily Bushy had it.
Yeah. And then that moment, I think in my house, actually, the TV turned on, I think probably about 30 seconds before the moment. My husband started screaming, and I'm thinking, what just happened here? Anyway, little did I know, Emily Bushy became a queen. Okay.
Yes.
Tell me something else I don't know here.
I'll tell you something else you don't know, Aaron Burnett. Just take a look at the experts. Final Four correct teams. We have Emily Bushy up here with 4. How about Sir Charles Barkley with just 2? How about a former president of the United States, a huge fan of basketball, Barack Obama, just 2? How about famed sportscaster Hannah Storm, who, of course, hosted all of those NBA pregame shows, all those NBA finals back in the day, now at ESPN. Look at that, just 2. So Emily Bushy crushing the field, doing something historic. I say, bravo, Emily.